It's so tiring today, but I really need to gather all my energy to study. But where should I even start? I think it's better for me to study strict liability first. The class is coming up, and I don't want to fall behind. Alright, let's do this.
Hello everyone, today we'll be discussing about the concept of strict liability, particularly as established in the case of Reynolds and Fletcher.
Strict liability is applied when a person for their own purposes brings onto their land and collects something that likely to cause harm to others. And if it does escape, they are still responsible for any damages, regardless for the negligence.
Do you know a claimant can sue the defendant under negligence, strict liability, or even both depending on the situation? In negligence, you have to prove there is a duty of care, breach of duty, the causation, as well as damages suffered. Meanwhile, the element of non-natural use of land should be proven in the strict liability.
What is deemed as non-natural use of the land?
First, it might be something non-natural. For example, by storing a large amount of water like swimming pool. It is also must be an extraordinary use of land. For instance, keeping a big amount of chemicals or simply by keeping wild animals. The next element is there must be an escape. This means the hazardous substance or activity must escape from the defendant's land and cause damage. Lastly, the damage must be reasonably foreseeable. The damage from the escape must be reasonably foreseeable. The defendant doesn't need to predict the exact harm, but it must be a foreseeable consequence of their activity or land use.
Counsel, please present your case.
Your Honor, Patrick and Dorothy Langan are organic farmers in Yakima Valley, Washington. They dedicated their life in producing chemical-free crops and maintaining their organic certification. But unfortunately, the defendant, Valleycopters, a pesticide company, sprayed chemical on the neighboring farm. This chemical drifted into my client's property, contaminating their crops and leading to the revocation of their organic certification.
So, how did your clients notice that the defendant had damaged their crops?
Your Honor, my clients work very hard and non-stop to build their organic farm and have never used pesticide. But after Valleycopters sprayed their chemicals, my client noticed visible damage to their crops. So the inspector soon confirmed contamination and revoked their organic certification.
How did this actually affect your clients?
Without their organic certification, they could no longer sell their crops at the premium prices they relied upon. This resulted in substantial financial losses.
Thank you, Counsel. Defense?
Your Honor, my client followed all safety protocols when applying pesticides on the neighboring farm. They also monitored wind conditions and acted responsibly.
And on what basis do you actually claim this was safe?
Your Honor, my client is committed to safe pesticide application. They use approved methods and equipment, ensuring compliance with all industry standards.
But isn't it true that pesticide drift is a non-risk even with precautions?
Yes, it is possible, but it is extremely rare.
Were you aware that Langan's farm was organic and highly sensitive to contamination?
Obviously, we were aware about that, but we cannot have reasonably expected that the pesticide will drift onto their property.
So from this scenario, I'm pretty sure that you guys have some ideas on strict liability. So from this particular case, I will explain more about strict liability so that you guys can have more understanding on it. Let's talk about the case commentary on the case of Langan and Valleycopter. In the case of Lange's Air helicopter, it underscores the fundamental principle of the doctrine of strict liability, which offering a complete analysis of its application in the modern environmental and property dispute. Strict liability imposes accountability without fault, which ensuring that those who engage in inherently hazardous activity aware the responsibility for any resultant harm, regardless of their intent of precaution. So in this doctrine, as applied in this case, there are three critical elements. But what are those three critical elements? The first element is the non-natural use of land. For helicopter's activity, which is spraying the pesticide, constituted a non-natural use of the land, unlike the traditional farming practices. So, the use of hazardous chemical significantly elevated the risk to the neighboring properties, including the Lange's organic farm. This deviation from the ordinary use highlight that the need for heightened the responsibility in managing such activities. The second element is escape of the pesticide. Despite being applied to the helicopter's land, the chemical drifted beyond their boundaries, which contaminating the Lange's organic crops. This transitory harm illustrates the type of the risk that strict liability seeks to address, in which situation where the consequences of a hazardous activity cannot be contained. And the third element is reasonably foreseeability. The foreseeable nature of the pesticide drift further established helicopter's liability. It is well known in the agriculture practices that spraying chemicals can lead to drift, especially when operating near sensitive or organic properties. Thus, the risk was not only foreseeable, but clearly unavoidable given the nature of the activity. Thus, strict liability applies here because the activity itself was inherently dangerous and no amount of precaution could fully eliminate the risk of harm.